Hello, this is the third in a series on Mennonite history. It's called Gaining Ground in Polish Prussia and Beyond. It's a talk by me, Elma Schemenauer. I was born into a Mennonite family, Elma Mary Martins, on the Saskatchewan Prairie, so I sometimes call myself Elma Mary from the Prairie. There's my website if you ever want to have a look at it. I've written quite a few different books that you might want to look at and might be interested in. You can find me usually by the words Elma Mary from the Prairie, even if you don't remember the website, or by the name Elma Schemenauer. Okay, we've been talking about the Mennonites or the Anabaptists, called Anabaptists in the beginning, and then many changed to being called Mennonites after Menno Simons. They started in Switzerland down here, and then similar ideas developed in Belgium, the Netherlands, and northern Germany. And these are amongst the lowlands of Europe. The land is low and kind of marshy in some cases, and people work hard to recover land to be able to use it for farming and other purposes, using windmills and so forth. So it's not like Switzerland where it's mountainous. There's another area over here in what's Poland now, but used to be called Polish Prussia. And it was kind of complicated. It was under the Polish crown, but it was also ruled by Prussia, which was a very powerful German state. They had a sort of a combination there, kind of a probably a somewhat uneasy combination. Danzig was a seaport on the Baltic Sea in Polish Prussia. It's now called Gdansk. And here's a picture of Danzig as it looked years ago. In 1547, German and Polish nobles in the Danzig area invited Mennonites from the Netherlands and Belgium in to drain the swamps. They had all this swampy area, and they thought, well, the Mennonites, they're good at that. From the Low Countries, they're good at that. They've been used to that in their own countries, and so maybe this would be a good idea. In return, the noblemen offered the Mennonites certain advantages. They said they would gain religious freedom, and this was a huge thing because they had been persecuted quite a bit in the areas where they had lived before, and also exemption from military service. And this was also another big thing because they were committed to not bear arms, not go to war, and if the Polish Prussian state was going to offer them exemption from that, this would be a very, very attractive thing. So some of them left and went there, not all of them. But here we see a map of that area. Here's Danzig, today called Gdansk. And there is this very sort of swampy area. There's rivers running through it. This is the Vistula, and this is the Nogat, and they empty into the Baltic Sea here. And so the Mennonites were charged with the idea of draining this area here. It was very, very challenging, probably more challenging than what they had faced back in Belgium and the Netherlands and northern Germany. A lot of them died of swamp fever, but they persisted. Those who remained, they dug canals, built windmills and dikes to divert the excess water into the Baltic Sea. After a while, their efforts bore fruit. Where there had been only marsh land, now there were meadows, orchards, gardens, and fields. It was quite amazing. This became sort of a showpiece for the Polish Prussians. When important people would come into the area, they would usually tour them through the Mennonite lands to see what the Mennonites had accomplished. It was quite amazing. During that time, Mennonites became known for hard work, initiative, starting things, thrift, simplicity, cleanliness, good organization, honesty, and self-sufficiency, all very positive qualities, although they were heretics. They were still regarded as heretics, but they were tolerated because they had all these good qualities. Here we see a wedding of the time, people carrying some things to eat there, and musicians and so forth celebrating a wedding. By religion, the Danzig area people were Lutheran or Catholic, and their churches discouraged them from marrying Mennonites. Also, the government discouraged them from marrying Mennonites because they were regarded as heretics, but some did anyway. There's a story about a man named Johann Zawacki. He was a nobleman, and he had some land dealings with the Mennonites, and he became so impressed with them and how they dealt with him, and how honorable they were and so forth, that he converted and became a Mennonite himself, and also married a Mennonite woman. And as the story goes, any Mennonite with the last name Sawatsky, which is what Zawacki eventually changed into, any Mennonite with that last name or having ancestors with that name is a descendant of this nobleman, Johann Zawacki. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it makes a good story. The names that the Mennonites had brought with them from the Netherlands and Belgium persisted in Danzig area because they did marry mostly within their own group, married other Mennonites, Epp, Entz, Wiebe, Fast, Wall, Martens, which was my name before I was married, and Dick. But Danzig area names were also added because some people were converted, became Mennonites, and also because of marriages. So some of these names that were added in that Danzig area were Plett, Bergman, Telitsky, Rogalski, and Sawatsky, which I have already mentioned. The language of the Mennonites in Polish Prussia in church was Dutch. They had the Dutch Bibles, their Dutch hymnals, and their other literature, and they conducted their services in the Dutch language because it was the language they had brought with them, and they were used to that for church. The language of daily life was a Low German. They had brought a form of Low German, a kind of Low German, Low Country German, with them from Belgium and Netherlands and Northern Germany. They had brought this with them. And then when they came to Polish Prussia, they found people around them speaking another form of Low German, and the two kinds of Low German kind of mixed together, and they became known as a Mennonite Low German, and that's kind of distinctive, and people still speak that today. Some do anyway. Meanwhile, other Mennonites are doing things elsewhere. It's not only in Polish Prussia. In the 1680s and after, a number of Mennonites from southern Germany and Switzerland began moving to Pennsylvania and elsewhere in America. In 1693, a Swiss Mennonite still back in Switzerland, Jacob Ammon, thought the church wasn't strict enough. He thought it was becoming worldly and was becoming more like, the Mennonites were becoming more like their neighbors in bad ways, and he wanted them to be much stricter. So he and his followers started what became known as the Amish Church. There are still lots of Amish people around, lots of Amish communities in North America, especially in the United States, and then there's a number of them in Southern Ontario. And they are sometimes confused with Mennonites, which is not surprising because there are a lot of similarities, but there are important differences, as they themselves would point out. When people look at books and so forth, like novels and so forth, that they consider Mennonite novels, they often put the Amish novels right in there with them, and that's not surprising because the Amish church itself has kind of separated into Amish Mennonites and Amish, and I think maybe some other ones as well. In 1698, an important thing happened amongst the Mennonites in America. Up until that time, they had met in each other's homes. They would share their faith there, sing together, read the Bible, and so forth. And sometimes somebody would read a sermon from a minister that they had back in the old country. But in 1698, there was a first actual Mennonite worship service, official Mennonite worship service, and it was held in a place called Germantown. Picture of it here on the right, and it's north of Philadelphia. The preacher was Wilhelm Ruttingshuisen, and his name has been changed, made a little more English sounding, William Ruttinghouse, I believe, something like that. All right, back into Polish Prussia. The 1700s Polish rule weakened, which worried the Mennonites because the Polish had generally been easier on them than the Prussians. And the Danzig area Mennonites slowly became subjects of the powerful German state of Prussia. And here is its crest, one of them anyway, I think. Prussians pressured them to change their church language from Dutch to German. They thought, well, you know, this doesn't make sense. You Mennonites are living there. Sure, you've done a lot of good in the swamps and marshes. You've done marvelous things, but you're not you're not one of us. You're not part of us. And here you are being protected by us and enjoying all the benefits of living in our territory. And you're still speaking Dutch. We want you to change to German. And so they actually did change. One of my ancestors, an Epp, who was a minister, was one of the ones who helped to bring in that change from Dutch to German. The Mennonites' right to military exemption also became shaky. They were not conscripted into the army, as far as I know, but there were certain rules put on them. There were certain rules about whether they could buy land or not, and how much they could buy, and under what conditions, and so forth. And so they became kind of restricted because they refused to go into the military. What's happening in America? 1775 to 1783 is the American Revolution. Two sides, the Patriots wanted independence from British rule. The Loyalists stayed loyal to Britain. What are the Mennonites going to do? They don't believe in fighting. Mennonites refuse to take sides, and they refuse to fight. Nevertheless, they were conscripted into the army, some of them, and there's a story told of a group of them who were sitting there with rifles in their hands and supposed to be shooting these rifles, and they were not shooting. An officer came along and said, "Why aren't you shooting?" And they said, "Well, we don't see anything to shoot at." And so the officer said that, "Look, there you are, there's the enemy, not that far away. It's certainly within shooting distance." And the Mennonites said, "Oh, no, those are people. We don't shoot people." After a while, the government started to realize they couldn't do too much with these Mennonites in the army, and so they let them do other kinds of service where they wouldn't be actually bearing arms, like doing medical service and working in the forests and that kind of thing. In 1786, some American Mennonites moved to what's now southern Ontario. It was called Upper Canada at the time. They were wanting to remain loyal to the British Crown, but that was not the only reason. There was good farmland up there, and they thought they would like to go there and start farming there. And in 1800, large numbers of Mennonites began moving there. Many of them moved with these kinds of wagons called Conestoga wagons, pulled by horses. All right, we'll see you in the next episode of this YouTube series. It's called Mennonite History 4, Russian Honeymoon and Winds of Change. This is one of the books I've written. It's called Consider the Sunflowers. It's a 299-page novel, takes place in the 1940s, some of it in Vancouver, and much of it on the prairies, Saskatchewan prairie. And it's a love story, it's a family story about community, church life, and that kind of thing. It's available for $20 if you're interested, from the publisher, Borealis Press of Ottawa. And there's a Borealis Press in the United States, but this is the one in Ottawa, Canada, or Chapters Indigo, or Amazon. Thank you for listening.